Hello, history class. So this should be the last video for this remote learning 2-week session that you'll have to listen to. This particular set of notes is called France in the New World. So on your sheet, it should say France in the New World at the top there. So let's just get right into it. The French started settling colonies in early 1600s. Samuel de Champlain was one of the first explorers to come over, probably in around 1603, and he was exploring all of the area along the St. Lawrence River. In 1608, he made the first French settlement. That's your first fill in the blank up there is settlement. And again, it was along the St. Lawrence River where he had been exploring. He ended up naming this settlement Quebec. That's the next blank, 2 bullet points down. Quebec. In 1609, he actually explored a large lake that now bears his name too. It borders like what is now current day Vermont and New York, and the lake, as I said, it's called Lake Champlain, named for him. So he did a lot of exploring for the French. It ends up that this whole area then it becomes a French colony. So they gave it the name New France. So that's the next blank, New France. And this was very common for them to be very fond of their home and where they came from. So a lot of times what they would do is just put the word new in front of it. We'll see that with like New York, New Amsterdam, New Netherlands. They do that quite a bit. Now the French, their goals were pretty different from the Spanish. We know from learning about the Spanish earlier that their goals were typically find gold, silver, precious metals, things like that. That was what they were after primarily. And unfortunately, when it came to their relationship with the Native Americans, they tended to enslave them. Some came to try to convert them to Christianity. Many came and were interested in enslaving them. We're going to see that the French took a different approach to the Native Americans and a different approach too to what they were after. Their goal was to profit from fish and furs. So that's your next 2 blanks, fish and furs. The furs were highly valued in Europe, so it was a moneymaker for them. Things like beaver skins, for example, would be made into hats, and they were very popular in Europe at the time. And in order to be successful in this, they would trap their own furs, but they would also trade with the Native Americans because the Native Americans would be obviously trapping animals, killing animals for their furs so that they could have them and their meat, but they would trade with the colonists in New France. So traded with Native Americans, that first bullet point, Native Americans is your next fill in the blank. Of course, if you're going to be trading, you're going to establish trading posts. And Champlain was one of the people that encouraged the Native Americans to come and trade at their trading posts. The 2 of the trading posts that were established for the French, number 1 blank is Quebec City, and the second is Montreal, Montreal. Now, if the French colonists themselves were going to look for these furs, these trappers had a name. They were called coureurs du bois. They were runners of the woods, quote unquote. They were independent traders, blank after coureur du bois, traders who lived among the Indians. They would also paddle their canoes deep into the wilderness, trying to trap furs themselves and trade with the Indians. And many of them married Indian women and started families also. Now, in 1660, King Louis XIV sent 3,000 settlers to New France. So 3,000 is your fill in the blank there. And among them, and this was new, this was a new concept, they sent young single women. So women is your next blank. Because they were wanting to expand their population. So they wanted the men that were here that were colonists to marry and have families, and the population would expand. And that did indeed happen. With the fur trade actually on the decline, and with families you want a little more stability, colonists began to farm. So that's the next blank for the next bullet point. Colonists begin to farm. And why would they do this? Like I said, they have families now, they need to feed their families. And also, the fur trade was on a decline in Europe. So declines is that next blank. And then Indian wars had been erupting around the area, so that affected the fur trade also. Now in 1673, a missionary who had founded 2 missions along the Great Lakes, his name was Jacques Marquette, or he was also referred to as Father Marquette. He and Louis Jolliet explored more, and they provided the French with a waterway, which is your next blank, waterway through the heart of North America. What they did was they went in canoes and paddled their canoes from the shores of Lake Michigan down the Mississippi River. That's the next blank, Mississippi. This was a pretty big deal for the French because the Mississippi River, as most of you would know, very large river, long river that basically cuts the United States in half. So it's quite an extensive waterway. And the fact that they could go through the heart of North America was a big deal. As they did their exploring, the 2 of these men were convinced that it flowed into the Gulf of Mexico, not the Pacific Ocean as was hoped. Because again, if it was to the Pacific Ocean, you have a way to get through to the Pacific and onto Asia if need be. But they were convinced it didn't. They figured it went down to the Gulf of Mexico, which was a correct assumption. So they ended up heading back. But now later in 1682, a man by the name of La Salle, that would be capital L, little a, capital S-A-L-L-E, that's your next blank. He actually completed this exploration, and he did take the Mississippi all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. He ended up claiming the entire Mississippi Valley for France, which was a large chunk of area along both sides of the Mississippi there. He ends up naming it Louisiana for King Louis XIV. So Louisiana is spelled Louisiana. That's your next blank. Now we think of Louisiana and think of the state, that little boot state down there by the Gulf of Mexico. But remember, this is not just that little area. This is all along the Mississippi River. He named Louisiana. So that's it for the French. On to the Dutch. The Dutch are now going to arrive also in the New World. They come at around 1610. Dutch traders arrive in what is the Hudson River Valley. That's your fill in the blank there, Hudson. And they also are trading with Native Americans. And that's the blank below there. Now, eventually, because this trading post did so well, they established a permanent colony there and they named it New Netherlands. So with having this colony here, the Dutch were eager to send more people over. So in 1624, 300, next blank, settlers from the Netherlands arrived at Fort Orange, which was the trading post there. Later, this Fort Orange trading post is going to be known as Albany. That should be familiar to you because that's a city in New York. In 1626, more settlers come, and the governor of the colony, Peter Minuit, buys an island there from the Indians, and he names it New Amsterdam. Again, with the new in front of the name. I'll spell that for you too. You guys know how to spell new, but Amsterdam would be a whole nother word. A-M-S-T-E-R-D-A-M. So by 1653, the population there grew to be about 800. So more than doubled in size. By 1664, however, the English were also in this area. They were eager to move westward. So New Amsterdam was basically in the way. So what they did, the English seized New Netherlands, and they basically take it, and they're interested, like I said, in moving westward. Westward is your blank there, Westward. I don't know why I just spelled that for you guys. I'm sure you all know how to spell westward. Anyway, again, they're trying to move westward. They seize New Netherlands from the Dutch, and the English name it New York. That's your next fill in the blank. And that was named for the King of England at the time's brother, who was the Duke of York. So you can see names in our country date all the way back to 1664 and even before then, when they're giving names. Like things were named for Henry Hudson, like the Hudson River Valley, the Hudson River, Lake Champlain. So lots of history there. All right, next section is colonization's impact on Native Americans. There were some positive things. For example, under this section, it says that the Native Americans were involved in the fur trade with the French and the Dutch. So fur is your fill in the blank there. That was a positive thing for the Indians because they got to be exposed to things that they would not normally be exposed to in order to trade for and use. Some of those examples would be, and this is your first fill in the blank under traded for manufactured goods, cloth. They would trade for cloth, iron pots and tools, and also something new to them, guns. That would be the last fill in the blank. Okay. This would be on the next page. Some of the negative things, though, impacting the Indians. A specific one is how they had trading partners. The French were tending to trade with the Hurons, and they had an alliance with them. And then you have the Dutch trading with the Iroquois. And the thing is that the Hurons and the Iroquois, they go way back. And they were always feuding. They were basically enemies. So the French are trading with the Hurons. The Iroquois are trading with the Dutch. They're enemies. The Dutch are trading firearms with the Iroquois. The Iroquois go and use the guns they traded for from the Dutch against the Hurons. So that's going to be devastating to the Hurons, who at the time didn't have firearms. So a negative impact there. Another negative impact, the diseases that came from the colonists. Diseases is your next blank on the second bullet point down. Smallpox is just to name one for sure. Typhoid, another. The colonists would have come over. They would have had immunity to some of these things, but the Native Americans had no immunity. So if one of them gets it, it's going to run rampant through their tribe. Next bullet point down. After the fur trade kind of died down, after they had traded extensively with the Native Americans, what ended up becoming more valuable to the colonists concerning the Native Americans than the trade that they were having was the land that the Native Americans lived on. We're going to see this is going to be something that impacts the Native Americans for years and years to come. So land is your next fill in the blank there. Land of the Native Americans became more valuable to colonists than trade. Some colonists would buy the land, like Governor Minuit did. Others would just take the land, which of course was not right. So I'm going to end there. The summary part that's below that, we're going to do when we come back to school next week. So we'll leave that for next week when we're going over just to summarize everything, and we'll also go over your Age of Exploration worksheet so that I'm sure that you guys have all the right answers on that, because we'll be looking to have a test on this in the upcoming, not next week, but possibly the week after that. So, all right, guys, enjoy the rest of your, I guess, break and remote learning. For me, I just have you studying for your test for next Tuesday. And if you need to catch up on any work, but enjoy your weekend. It's going to be a lovely October weekend. So I'll see you next week.